throughout my parliamentary career as a musician myself in music industry issues, and always getting to that key question, where's the money and where does it go and who gets it. I think if there ever was going to be a prime minister who would be committed to this agenda, then Andy Burnham is the guy.
Welcome to the Drowned in Sound podcast, Lord Brennan. The first time I've had to use someone's formal title to open the Drowned in Sound podcast.
Well, you don't have to.
We've had guests. I don't have to. Okay.
You can call me Kevin.
But I feel like I should do.
Fine.
You have been someone that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, so it's great to finally talk to you. We've talked with Tom Gray about the Brennan Bill in Parliament, which involves Spotify, so we'll touch on that a little bit later. But firstly, I wanted to talk to you about the fan-led review of live and electronic music, which you led for the CMS committee. We can quickly explain what that is in a second. And the government have now responded to it. And we have a new Prime Minister who was loosely involved in it, who seems to be a big advocate for grassroots music. So I thought it was perfect timing to have a chat, find out a bit more about I think I'm allowed to say, record-breaking response to a government committee survey type thing. So Kevin, would you be able to quickly tell our audience a little bit about you and then a little bit about the fan-led review of live and electronic music?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sean. Yeah, of course. And I'm Kevin Brennan. I am a member of the House of Lords, so you are technically correct. Lord Brennan's my title. I was a member of Parliament for 23 years up until the last election, when I stood down and then got appointed to the Lords just after that. So in a sense, in politics terms, that means it's a bit like you're on the seniors tour in golf or something. You're kind of still involved, still the right side of relevant, but not as heavily involved in the day-to-day politics we've all seen so much.
It's the equivalent of playing golf with Gary Lineker in your world, then.
Well, I think you end up as being like Ed Balls presenting Good Morning Britain, I suppose, as a former politician I used to work with. And
well, I guess you get to hang out with Tom Gray from Qobuz.
I do. And that is true.
It's interesting people.
And Tom's been a friend for many years, and is a great man. But so I have taken an interest throughout my parliamentary career as a musician myself in music industry issues, and always getting to that key question, where's the money and where does it go and who gets it, which is something I've always been very interested in generally in politics, but particularly with a specialism for the music industry. And yes, that led me to, when I was a member of the CMS, as it's called, Culture, Media and Sport Committee you referenced earlier on, a few years back, I kicked off an inquiry into the economics of music streaming, which coincided with COVID and was sort of popcorn eating material for lots of people in the music industry, stuck at home watching the Zoom sessions that we had with various high-ups in the music industry, including record label bosses. And that, I think, kicked off a real debate, not just in the UK, but across the world. I go to conferences and people approach me and say, thanks for doing what you did. It really sparked a debate in our jurisdiction as well about streaming and the economics of it, and where the money goes, and how creators can get rewarded in this world of digital music.
I think one of the things Tom Gray touched on in our conversation was how important it was for the record labels, and people seeing that the record company deals with these platforms is also one of the big issues, and the historical kind of contracts people have signed. And I don't know whether that would have been something you would have expected to have come up, but that seems to be quite a key part of it, as much as like how much the platforms are paying. It's sort of what they've agreed to on the behalf of their artists.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And, these things don't just exist in nature, as it were, how people get paid. Somebody somewhere has made a decision about how much is going to be allocated. Once the government takes its slice off the top in VAT or whatever it is, how much of the rest of it's going to be allocated, and to whom, and on what basis. And if you're allocating monies for music that's been streamed on the basis of contracts that were signed, some cases decades ago, when this whole idea was science fiction of music streaming, it is quite an extraordinary situation that those contracts, when people were distributing millions of records in lorries around the world and so on are the same for things being distributed by a digital network. So we dug deep into that, and that did result in me introducing a bill into Parliament. Unfortunately, never made it into law as a private member's bill, but I think it did help turn the dial hugely on the debate around streaming and kicked off a whole sequence of work, including which the government sort of hosted, if you like, through the Intellectual Property Office, which is the copyright body, and brought record labels, streaming services, creators, and so on around the table to really try and iron out something fairer, with some achievements, but it's still an ongoing issue, and I think there's still a big issue about streaming and about the unfair way in which creators are treated, in particular songwriters as well.
And to pivot, did the artists are now making their money from touring turn into, are they?
Well, of course.
And what you've been doing with the fan-led review.
Yeah, of course. At the time we did the original inquiry, there was no touring because of COVID. So it really set it into sharp relief what people were getting or not getting out of their recorded music through streaming. But yes, then typically people say, well, you don't make money through records anymore, you make it from touring. And there's a whole set of other issues there around live music, which the Culture Committee, after I'd left the House of Commons and went into the Lords, commissioned me to undertake this fan-led review. Kind of got the idea a bit from the fan-led review that took place into football, to really, for the first time, officially from a fan's perspective, try and see what are the things that they would like to see out of the live music experience, or what are the problems, what are the issues, what are the things that the live sector is getting right, what are the things that they're getting wrong. And I produced the report earlier this year with 7 sort of essentials, I call them, 7 essentials of live that we should all remember when we're talking about the fans' perspective on live music, and a large number of recommendations, some for government, some for local government, some for the industry itself, some for fans, really, in some ways, about how, we could turn the dial in favour of fans in the live sector.
I came along to one of your roundtable sessions down at Ministry of Sound. You did those all over the country. So it was a really thorough report. It built on some work that I was involved in last year called the Music Fans Voice Survey. You had thousands of fans dig into all of the issues that fans face buying music, buying tickets, getting to shows, getting home from shows. And your recommendations cover the kind of the 7 things. Is it called the Fans Charter?
Yes.
That you'd like to see come in.
Yeah.
And I think that some of them are quite obvious. Some of them were maybe not obvious to people outside of music. But I thought my favorite one was the one Celebrate. So I thought if we could maybe quickly talk on the kind of embrace live music, not just as a kind of money-making thing, but as a public good.
Yeah.
Like that felt like a really key part of your findings of what fans were telling you, because as I'm sure most people are aware, there's no association or body that represents music fans. So in all of the reports that the government's ever done, they've been listening to the record industry, the independent record industry, people representing musicians, songwriters, producers, but no one representing the fans. So there's a very obvious empty seat at the table in a lot of music industry discussions. It was something that I first realized when Kate Bush tickets were being flogged on secondary ticketing, despite obviously her saying that definitely you can't get in. And I was like, why is there nobody that represents us? And I came across Adam Webb from the Fanfare Alliance, and that took off. Anyway, that was a very roundabout way of getting into the kind of celebration bit. And I think there is a bit of a kind of complicated nest of topics you covered, but I think the recommendations are really clear and simple.
Yeah. I think celebration's really important, and really strongly came across from fans that they don't regard going to a gig or a concert or live music event just like any other form of consumer spending or anything of that kind. It's a much more personal, sometimes even a quasi-religious experience for some people, but certainly a communal experience, and that's essential really to the whole thing. And in the same way, with the football fans and the Football Fans Association, the way that there's something more to it than just a pure business transaction when somebody buys a ticket and goes to see an artist or a group or whatever it is. And also, yes, it's a business. It's we're not expecting people not to have to pay for it. We want the musicians to get paid after all. But it's something more than that. It actually contributes to society's welfare in a way, I think, that isn't often captured properly in the way that policy is made around live music. And I just wanted to put that up front, to say we should really realize the benefits, that live music and the live music experience brings to people individually and to us, as a society, communally. And even if we can't put a direct monetary value on it, we should actually be capable of acknowledging that and celebrating it, and saying this is why it is important that public policy reflects how much good live music does for society.
What came out of the report in terms of how fans explained that? Like, I think I remember reading bits from the Music Fans Voice survey around people just talking about the benefits to their mental health, the kind of friendships they've made, feeling part of communities. Was it all those kinds of things you got out of the roundtable sessions in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. But people finding a sense of belonging sometimes in a community. There was a good example. You went to the one at the Ministry of Sound, and I also did one at Sub Club up in Glasgow. People who go clubbing, because this was about electronic music as well as live bands and artists and so on, orchestras or whatever. And that sense of finding your tribe, finding a community you could be part of, which is so important for people's well-being and mental health. And just the way that the live music experience brings a kind of sense of joy and well-being. It without a doubt, that came across very, very strongly from people who attend live music events. And it seemed to me it's something that any government concerned for the public good should want to encourage and support.
So that's Celebrate. What were the 6 others?
Well, the second one was ticketing, which not a surprise really, is it? And it's really, we want to try and create a culture where around live music events where ripping off fans isn't the number one priority. It's actually making sure that there's a fair practice about the sale of tickets, the pricing of tickets, all that sort of thing. And some of the practices that have crept in recent years are really strongly resented by fans. That came across very clearly. And as we know, the one of the recommendations that I made was that the government should get on with it. Basically, what it said it's going to do about the secondary ticketing market. It has announced a draft bill, but what that means in technical terms is that it's down the road a bit before they'll actually do it, for the lay person who's not involved in politics. And there's always a concern as a parliament goes on. We're now 2 years into the current part. It might seem longer to some people with a new Prime Minister coming in, but we're 2 years in. And, unless you're careful, you're running into the next election, before you've got the legislation through and implemented. So getting on with that is important. Ticketing. Grassroots, again, probably not a surprise, a real concern about fans about making sure that grassroots music venues and grassroots, music itself is valued, again, for its own sake, not just because, yes, it is the R&D of our future superstars and so on. It's the research and development, it's the incubator, but it is actually something that is a good in itself in local communities. Safety, making sure that fans, have a safe experience when they attend live music events. Accessibility, lots of stories of good practice, actually, quite interestingly out there. But clearly it's very, very patchy, and making sure that the principle should be that, think and act accordingly about accessibility for all wherever possible when doing live events. Transport, music fans are very practical. And, as I said to, some leaders in local authorities, you can't call yourself a music city if you can't get a bus home at the end of the gig. It's as simple as that. You've got to be planning and integrating your services to make sure it is actually serving music fans who are attending live music events. And finally, one we just touched on really, which was voice, making sure that the fans' voices are listened to and acted upon, and that they're at the table, as you put it, Sean, whenever there's a discussion about policy relating to live music. And one of the recommendations in there was that the government should take the initiative a bit and at least try and kickstart a proper music fans association with a bit of seed funding to get it going.
This episode of the Drowned in Sound podcast is presented in partnership with Qobuz, the platform that pays artists 4 times more than the industry standard, that has high quality audio, that has human curation, which as a human curator is something that I truly value over the kind of algo slop that you get on some platforms. You can really hear the difference. I know lots of places talk about the audio qualities, and as soon as I moved across, it sort of felt like I was rediscovering music, which is one of the platform's slogans. If you're worried about your playlists, you can use Soundiz. It's a really good tool that's part of the sign-up process when you join Qobuz. It just transfers everything across. If you'd like a free trial of this platform that's independently owned and made for music enthusiasts, head to drownedinsound.org/playlists, where you can hear not only our playlists, but get a free trial. You can also find these details in the show notes to this episode. And now back to this episode of the Drowned in Sound podcast, brought to you in partnership with Qobuz. We're now 2 or 3 months since you published the report. The government have now responded. What did you make of the initial response from government? Then we'll move on to some of the industry response.
Yeah, I think I'd say, they rolled it in with a number of measures, which are positive things. They've published a music plan. Tick. I think it's good that they've done that. There are things we might like more to see in it. That's good. They've appointed Michael Duggar, the former chief executive of UK Music, as a music champion. Now, that might sound a bit airy-fairy, but knowing Michael as I do, Michael's a doer, and I think that he will sort of actually hold the government to account a bit about what it said it's going to do in the music plan. And in fact, if I know him, he'll probably also try and move it on as well and enhance it as time goes on. So I think that's a tick as well. We've got Andy Burnham as the new Prime Minister. I think that's a tick as well. He's somebody who's got a record in this area, and obviously he's a genuine music fan with a passion for it and an understanding of how...
Did the fan-led review recommend having a music fan as Prime Minister?
It didn't. I should have, though, wouldn't I? If I'd been properly prescient, I would have put that in and claimed credit for it. He has played with me live in a band, so I mean, and he can play. So
is that in MP4?
It was with MP4. Yeah, we were the former band of parliamentarians that I was a member of. We were legends in our own imaginations. We're kind of a little bit into sort of semi-retirement now. So whether if the right offer comes along, we might play again. Who knows? And
do you do MC5 covers?
Well, we should do, didn't we? We did have an EP called EP3 or EP5. Actually, we had 5 tracks on it, but we haven't done any MC5 covers yet. Good idea, though. Yeah, why not? Or we could also cover Parliament. No, we could go on all day, couldn't we? With possible groups we could cover. In terms of the response to my report, I'm giving that half a tick, I think is what I'm going to say at this stage. Yeah. I think the government have, said that they are, very positive towards the report. They've leaned in and accepted on some issues, But I think a lot of what they said in their response is based around existing initiatives, and I want to see, particularly from the new. To be clear, the response is from, the last administration, as it were, under Keir Starmer, just done before he stood down, and I would expect to see, under Andy Burnham's leadership, a government that actually would be keen to lean even more strongly into these recommendations. And come September, I hope there'll be an opportunity for me to appear with the minister before the select committee for us to, press on that a bit further. So I'm going to give them half a tick. They've responded positively, in fairness, and said they do some things, but other things like, some of the things I suggested about a fans association, they haven't really leaned into that as much as I'd hoped they would. They haven't said they'll make the ticketing levy, which gives money from stadiums and arenas down to grassroots music venues, a statutory basis, which I think it'll probably need for it to really survive and not wither on the vine when people lose interest. Things like kite mark for disability. There are lots of things that I think the government could do more on than they've suggested in the response, but I'm going to give them half a tick.
So one of the refrains that's coming out of Andy Burnham's camp, and I think he said it himself, is fairness you can feel. And I think with secondary ticketing and with booking fees, there's definitely an unfairness you can feel as a fan. Do you think that's an open door that he can just lean on and get something out the way? Because it's already in the Labour manifesto that there'll be a cap on resale. There's already been, I think 2 inquiries into secondary ticketing and into ticketing. Like, it doesn't seem like there's any more work needs to be done. That feels like to use an Everton fan's phrasing, an open goal that he can literally tap it in.
Yeah, I think one of the things Andy Burnham said is that he's keen to sort of like, it sounds like very technical, but to rewire Whitehall a bit in terms of its ability to get things done. And look, I've been a government minister back in the day under Gordon Brown, and I brought in some credit card reform, and what happens is you say, right, we want to do this, and then the judiciary comes back and says, oh, well, if you do that, it'll take this long, and they try and slow you down and make you drag your feet. And you've got to be quite robust, really, and say, look, we'll let you do it yourselves, but you've only got 12 months or whatever it is. Otherwise, we're legislating and we're not mucking about. And I think the problem with having a draft bill at the moment on ticketing is it feels, it may not be true, but it feels maybe as if your Viagogos and your others have sort of got their foot in the door and talked to someone and scared some civil servant into thinking we might get a judicial review of this policy and etc. I think the government needs to be clear. This is our policy intention, and we are going to legislate, and we're not going to put a draft bill out there for months on end to be kicked around. Yes, we're going to publish something, but then we're going to get on with it. So I would hope to see more urgency in this issue from under Andy Burnham, because I know he understands it very well.
And to take a step back, the fact there's not a fans association, someone like Viagogo can lobby ministers and MPs around something like ticketing because it's in their interest too. But there's no one doing that on behalf of fans to say this is deeply unfair. I've been told in the past, when like there's enough consumer rights protections, you don't need to worry about it. And it's like, well, that they're not really doing anything. And it feels as a fan that, like, I thought it was actually really interesting when we posted a bit about the fan-led review on our social channels. A couple of people responded saying, oh yeah, I've emailed my MP about secondary ticketing. They felt it was unfair too and responded to me. And they're like, I've emailed my MP 10 times about other things and never heard back. And I think that it's a very everyday thing that if you've ever had to buy, like an MP's buying tickets for their kids to go to a show, they've seen that, like, what? I'm paying to print my ticket at home, and I'm paying a restoration fee for a venue that's just opened, and like all of these things that are like tucked into the ticketing price, which it feels like, I think I saw Victoria Derbyshire write about the Oasis ticket stuff, and obviously she's quite, as a BBC presenter, has to be quite kind of down the line and balanced in her opinions, but she was just stunned by the sort of feeling of sitting in the queue thinking you were paying one price, it suddenly jumped up to another, and the unfairness of it. And she doesn't have to be a kind of like journalistic rigor to do anything other than just feel what she felt in that
exactly.
That
and
moment.
The industry says, oh, you don't understand how the ticketing market really don't understand, but actually people, they're very basic, simple principles here. And those are, the price you should pay should be the price that's advertised. You should know what you're going to pay. If you walk into a shop, to buy a Mars bar and it says, 80p in the window, then 80p is what you should pay when you get to the counter. So there should be none of this, these practices to get you to pay more. The extras. I mean, fans don't mind paying something genuine like what we found, like the ticketing levy, if it's a levy that is genuinely going to help the grassroots of music, and you can show that, rather than just an add-on. And what I found, quite interesting doing the fan-led review and digging into it is often, the booking fees, they're not there covering the actual administration costs of providing the back room to be able to administer the ticketing sales. They're actually just a carve up between, promoters, often artists as well, who, will often come out and say, oh, high ticket prices are terrible. Meanwhile, their management are negotiating a cut of a very non-transparent service charge that's being fitted on. So I think transparency is really important. Clarity. I understand a lot of shows are very expensive to put on. You're going to pay a lot of money to go and see a Taylor Swift, or someone like that, because it's not just a band and the back line. You've got it's an enormous sort of show that's being put on. But the practices that are going on in the ticketing world, they have to stop. And I think the government needs to be robust on it.
Yeah. One of the other things I found interesting this weekend, Mark David from the Music Venues Trust shared that Andy Burnham had bought a stake in the music venues properties. Points is around grassroots music. I think that's really interesting to see. There was literally a video of him at the Snug in Atherton talking about how important venues are for local communities. And I can't imagine any of the last, or I can't imagine even ministers, let alone prime ministers, standing in a grassroots venue talking about how important they are. So
Yeah.
again, like you've put these recommendations together, and it feels like, oh, if had you known there was going to be a different prime minister. I mean, we've had 2 years of Keir Starmer, who was in music class with Fatboy Slim, which he talks about a lot, but it didn't seem to materialize into music fans feeling heard and listened to, and that many of the changes were going to happen. And like you said, we did an episode with Which around the King's speech, because we all thought that secondary ticketing was finally going to go in there, because there's lots happening in America as well, and in Australia too. And it just feels like it's time for a change. It's time to the end of like ripping off fans. And I think around the World Cup, we heard quite a lot about secondary ticketing, and there's a lot more rules around secondary ticketing in football in this country because of hooliganism, and kind of because of fan associations, I'm assuming as well, putting their foot down a bit. Do you think that we're likely to see some change happen a bit quicker, and maybe the response from the Starmer government is going to be different to maybe if they'd put a response out in the next couple of weeks?
I think that Keir Starmer was genuine about his love of music and so on, but I think you're right that it didn't convey that very effectively, and I think it seemed a bit timid when it was a draft bill. And I am hoping that there'll be more, oomph behind the whole thing with Andy Burnham. He is genuinely someone. I was elected with Andy in 2001 to the House of Commons, so we were elected at the same time together. And he is genuinely someone who's a big music fan, and would absolutely be the sort of person who would want to take if he could help save a local grassroots music venue, and all those initiatives, I think, to try and stabilize the finances of grassroots music venues, in particular by helping them to purchase the freehold very often of the properties they're in, because they often, when a lease comes to an end, they get thrown out, and a viable venue sort of goes to pot. Even we know some are in trouble anyway financially, but even viable ones do. So hopefully that will happen, and I think if there ever was going to be a prime minister who would be committed to this agenda, then Andy Burnham is the guy.
So we've talked about the government's response. What have you made of the industry's response? Because obviously some of this impacts initiatives they're already doing. Some of it kind of goes against some of the business practices. But did you feel like there was enough did you feel like the industry embraced the report and the findings?
Well, in broad terms, UK Music, which is the umbrella body for most of the music industry, although it doesn't entail the, Live Nations of this world and so on, are very positive about the report and its recommendations. But I do think that obviously there is some criticism in the report pointing out what fans think of some of the big players in the live music sector and the way that they monopolize acts and venue and festivals and so on. And so I wouldn't necessarily expect them to embrace everything in the report, but I think they should realize that change is coming. Around ticketing, around things like that. There's the potential ultimately, if it's shown that their practices are anti-competitive, they may end up with a Competition and Markets Authority investigation. So they should listen to what the report says, and they should act accordingly. I think that independent spirit in music is important, and if it's all brought up and just becomes another branch of the entertainment industry, then something significant is lost. And so, I very much hope that they will respond positively in due course.
And then local government, some of the things in there around transport, like I manage the Anchoress, and Catherine and I have really pushed for stage times to finish at like 10 o'clock so people can get home after shows, because we were getting that feedback from her fan base. And also making shows more inclusive of parents and older generations that maybe have got to get up for work at 6 or 7. So we set this cap of finishing shows at 10 o'clock. And one of the reasons was we were doing a show in Liverpool, and fans that lived in like Preston and places not too far from Liverpool were saying, "Oh, can you tell me what the stage time is and finishes? Because the last train is 10:20." I'm like, Liverpool is world famous for its music scene. Steve Rotherham is all over all of the kind of reports. And it really surprised me that people that live so close to such a major music city weren't able to get back after like 11 o'clock when most shows normally finish. And I know from work I've done with different climate groups that fans traveling to a show contribute the most emissions if they're not able to take public transport. So there's sort of like two great reasons to have functioning late night transport or to provide the stage times for people. So what were some of the responses you've had so far from kind of the local governments and mayors?
Very positive, actually. And I think, it isn't always easy for local authorities. They don't always have control of all of these things. Unfortunately, a lot of the privatizations that took place in the past left local authorities with fewer powers to direct timetables and so on for transport, to integrate local public transport. But I think we're moving back in that direction. There's very much a movement to understanding, what people have had. People who live in London don't know they're born, really, do they, in terms of integrated public transport and public transport, available, at all sorts of hours that they aren't in the rest of the country. And so it's very positive. And in fact, I was talking to a cabinet member in Newport where we launched the report in South Wales. And she said to me, it's really useful to have this report to be able to, take it into cabinet in the local council and say, look, this is what we should be doing. And we're trying to do some of these things already. But it validates the direction of travel in trying to make sure that there are transport services available. I mean, obviously, artists and venues themselves can do a lot about publicising stage times. There was always a bit of a prejudice against it sometimes because people wanted people to get in early and buy drinks at the bar. I understand that. And not just turn up for the main act and, be there for the support act and so on. But, in this day and age, you've got to be transparent about these things. And sensible times for gigs to come to an end is a good thing. Clearly, that's not going to be right for every genre. I'm not saying that, although there are a lot more daytime clubbing going on, I'm told these days. I haven't participated myself yet, but...
I think Annie Mac does one that stops at midnight.
I think that
starts quite early.
I'm told they have them in the afternoon now for oldies, like me, so that you can be home for dinner time or whatever. Not quite sure whether that's for me or not, but going out on a Sunday afternoon and getting home at 8 o'clock from a show feels really good. Yeah, no, exactly. And you if you're working in the morning or whatever, and I think Steve Lamacq said one time, they're gone are the days when you went to a gig and if you were over 30, someone would say to you, what are you doing here, granddad? There's a much more wider generational attendance at lots of gigs and festivals and so on that would be unimaginable, years ago. It's a cross-generational activity very often, not every genre, but obviously much more than it used to be.
So I'm working on a magazine at the moment. To try and get more people to more shows. The Music Venues Trust have been supporting us. And we're thinking a lot about what are some of the small changes that could happen that are quite everyday, like, for instance, publishing stage times. But actually, if people are worried about people getting in for the support band, how can we better explain who the support bands are and join the dots so the audience are excited to go see the band that's on first rather than just being a random name on a poster? What were some of the things that came out of the report that you think fans want from the live industry or from their gig experience? Like, what were some of the good examples maybe of stuff that some places are doing but other places could learn from? Was there anything nice that you came across like that?
I think, I think that whole thing about, having good gig guides locally was something that really came up quite a lot. I assume these days everyone would be happy to go digging around on the internet, but actually there is a case for good old fashioned sort of gig guides to what's going on. Issues like things like stage time, knowing. I think people expect these days want to know more what to expect when they go somewhere than maybe in the past. I don't know whether that's to do with COVID and nervousness about going out, but there is definitely, I think, what came through a little bit, a feeling that people just want to know. So really good venues and, good local authorities provide really good information about what to expect when you get there, to a venue, how you can get in, how long the walk will be, what the times are, all those, what facilities are available. I think just basically generally under the heading of transparency and of thinking about fans first rather than as the final consideration is what makes all the difference.
It's interesting. One of the things, the Anchor S is clinically vulnerable, and one of the things that's really surprised us touring is how many venues got the COVID recovery fund money and put really great HEPA filters and like some of the venues which years ago we had no fresh air in them and they were just sweat boxes. Like the Brudenell in Leeds has, I think, about 6 different air filters around the venue. And I can imagine beyond COVID, it's also helping with spread of things like flu in the winter so that staff don't get as sick. And there's loads of other benefits. But I couldn't find anywhere online on a lot of the venues we went to's websites that said, oh, this is a clean air zone type of thing. Or there's like quite a lot of really basic things that venues could be doing. And I know why they're not, because they're all super busy.
Yeah.
They're probably, some of them are running the venue part-time alongside another job, and because the economics don't add up. And sometimes their business is as much running a pub as it is running a venue. And it's like there's not the resource there to do a lot of this stuff. But again, this is why some of the interventions and some of the resources that people need feel quite different to, oh, we just need to subsidize gig ticket prices or touring. Yeah. It's like there's a lot of infrastructure things that could change.
It's a great point. And it's also something that is great. Obviously, the Music Venues Trust does great work around this sort of arena of making people more aware of grassroots music venues. I also think it's something a fans association could be much more involved in communicating to the fan community the sorts of things you've been talking about. If you come to this venue, actually it won't be a smelly, dank, and some people like smelly, dank, sweaty venues, let's be clear about that. Yeah. But some people want to know, can I, simple things like, will I be able to sit down at a venue, and that's a big off-putting thing. It's not just for people who are in wheelchairs and things, but for for actual people who one reason or another, it doesn't mean that they have to be elderly, but for one reason or another might not be able to stand up for 2 hours without an opportunity to sit down. So all those sorts of things are really important to get that information across.
So the question I ask all my guests, and I think the framing of it is very much Spotify invested 500 million in Joe Rogan. And I always wonder how better could that money be spent to kind of not necessarily fix, but create some space and change in the industry. And my guests have given me lots of different answers. And I'd be fascinated to know, if you were given £500 million today, what were some of the things that you would do to improve the music scene?
The first thing I'd do would make sure that all the recommendations of my report are implemented, including seed funding, a grassroots fans association, making sure that there is money getting down to grassroots music venues, making sure there's a good scheme for safety and accessibility in venues. So clearly I would, there are 50 recommendations. If I gave them 10 million each, which I wouldn't obviously, but within the report, we could spend the 500 million in no time. But no, but I do seriously think that. I think that there's a lot of things that could be done when you have a one-off sum of money in politics. That's called capital money, so it's not repeatable. You either spend it on some infrastructure, so creating rehearsal studios and things like that, really great grassroots stuff like that could be done with money of that kind. But you can also try and endow good things so that they've got an income going forward, and that's the sort of thing where you could put a chunk of money into setting up a fans association and make sure it's got a stream of income that would enable it to go forward, and also support some of the work of the live levy, getting money down into improving facilities in grassroots venues. It's great stuff going on now where they're providing places where bands can stay overnight if they're playing a venue, have cheap accommodation at the improving the facilities you've been talking about for fans. So I'd go down that line. I think I'd also would like to see, I don't think it actually requires a big chunk of money, but I would like to see an effort put in by government to focus again on creator remuneration and to find ways to make sure that the money that's already flowing into the music industry through royalties, through copyright, is filtered down into creators. And finally, we haven't touched upon the whole issue of AI and so on, but maybe we will in a minute in future questions. But I do think the government doing some, proper research and thinking and surveys into the implications of AI for creators is a pretty important thing going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the term creators has become normalized in the industry as well, because I get why. It's like musicians, producers, songwriters, it's kind of but it's also the term that we talk about with YouTubers and people that make TikToks. Like the term creator has become a kind of normal term. So I just wanted to make clear to the listeners in case they hadn't come across that being used quite a lot in the industry now as a term. Music creators is often kind of a catch-all for those kinds of people. And I think that in the work that you did around Spotify and streaming, obviously it wasn't just Spotify, there's an entire industry. It feels like there's not been very much change. And I think there's such a market dominance of some of these platforms, and the ways in which fans and musicians can respond to that is quite challenging. And it's like, I often think of what my answer to that question might be, and would it just be setting up a lobbying group to lobby on behalf of fans and artists to get that kind of fairness? Because the AI industry, for instance, as you just touched upon, like there's a sovereign AI fund, which is managed by Tony Blair's daughter-in-law, I think, from what I was reading the other day. And there's a lot of money being handed out to big AI companies. But from people I've spoken to, there doesn't seem to be any checks and balances whether they're using copyrighted material of the labour force of the UK, the creative industries, actually, to build those platforms. I mean, there's been some in fairness, there's been some very strong and successful lobbying by people like the Musicians Union, the Ivors Academy, and so on in this area, as well as, because it's in their interest sometimes, some of the rights holders or some of the big record companies and so on, they have an interest in all of this as well. And in fact, that listeners may have noticed in the last year or so, the government's actually rode back from a position it took about allowing people's songs and creative output to be used without their permission, and they rode back on that now. And I think I'm very hopeful that the government have just appointed a minister for AI to be reporting to the cabinet. And I'm very hopeful that the government will understand it's got to get this right. It's got to make sure that those companies can't just steal everybody else's lunch. Because to be honest with you, those AI companies, as soon as someone starts using their, software and infringes their copyright, they'll be the first people kicking up about it. So ultimately, copyright is what actually enables creators to get paid. And if we don't defend the copyright regime that we have, and obviously make sure it's fit for purpose for whatever new technologies come along, then we will seriously be putting our creative industries in jeopardy. And that's a big success for this country. So it would be foolish to do it. Just in terms of learnings, obviously, you had some of the biggest names in the industry backing the bill that you were trying to get through Parliament around streaming. With AI, we've seen Dua Lipa and Elton John and all sorts of people use their platform and go on things like Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC to talk about AI. And what do you think it is that makes some campaigns more successful than others? Like, are there learnings from outside the music industry of things that people could, like, for instance, I'm assuming doing a big hefty piece of work like a fan-led review of live and electronic music helps a lot more than just some surveys from outside. Like, what do you think are the things which truly make government listen and laws change and the kind of differences actually enact and go through?
Yeah, I mean, it's the main thing is actually having a clear ask of government, I always think, and knowing what you want. And one of the problems, in the music industry for many years, something that I kind of went on about with colleagues in the music industry for many years, was that they would go to government without a clear ask, without a clear position. There's too many different viewpoints, I'd always say just hide the wiring. What ministers need to know is with clarity is what does the music industry need? And the problem is there are some conflicts of interest, obviously. What is in the interest of a huge corporation like Universal and its shareholders and its chief executive and team and so on might be different from what's in the interests of, an independent, brilliant artist like the Anchoress. They don't always sort of coincide, but there is actually a ground on which you can get together and be clear that you have clear asks of government. I think that's the most important thing. And as far as it comes with artists campaigning, I know some people roll their eyes a little bit and say, well, Elton John, why is he sort of kicking off? He's got millions and so on. And then they find out actually that in 1 year, the head of Universal Music actually earned more than Elton John and every other songwriter in Britain put together, including Sir Paul McCartney. When you realize that, there's something wrong. So I think it's important that people like Elton John do speak out, and he speaks out for the grassroots as well and for people coming through, the next generation of artists. And of course, he's got a platform, so people listen when he speaks. So that is part of it. But the most important thing is to be clear in what you're asking for with government and to explain why it fits in with the government's agenda. And this government's agenda, is supposed to be about being very supportive of the creative industries, understanding the power of music, not just as an economic driver, but as a good in society and the need to support that in the longer term. So I think, being effective mainly is being clear about what your objectives are.
So I could definitely ask you another 2 hours worth of questions, but I'm not going to Joe Rogan this podcast. So my final question for you, in the year 2050, if things go well, what would the music industry look like? And if your report is completely ignored and things just carry on as they are, how do you think music might be in 2050? So that's 25 years from now.
I know. And I was thinking, what was it like 24 years ago? It was my first, or a quarter of a century ago, back in 2001, which is actually when I was elected to Parliament for the first time. And it was before really streaming existed. So who knows what the technological implications will be of AI in 25 years' time. In the same way, we didn't really understand fully what the technological importance of streaming would be 25 years ago when I was first elected. I only just heard about an iPod, let alone anything else. I hope that, we will have a situation where human creativity is still valued and still rewarded, because that's what copyright exists to do. It doesn't exist to reward a desiccated calculating machine for, using its algorithms to produce a facsimile of human creativity, which is what AI does. It exists to reward and encourage human creativity. So I hope we still have, a very strong intellectual property framework that encourages humans to still be creative and make great music with each other together. And if we lose that live side, which you referred to, which is what my report is about, if we lose, particularly at the grassroots of it all, I think we'll be impoverished, both economically, but also culturally, and in terms of the health of the nation, well-being. So I very much hope that in 25 years' time, people will still want to gather together as human beings for a communal experience with others through music. And actually, ever since the history of human beings, people have done that. And I don't see any reason why they shouldn't keep doing that. But what we shouldn't do is allow opportunities for people to do that, to wither on the vine or to disappear. Because the more that happens, the more atomized we become as a society, and the more, unpleasant our society will become, the less intelligent we'll become, actually, the less healthy we'll be, and the less happy we'll be. So that's my hope for the future in 25 years' time. And finally, I suppose my hope is that I'll still be around to see it.
Then if you had a mic, I'd encourage you to drop it. That was perfect ending to the podcast. I just want to say, Lord Kevin Brennan, on behalf of music fans and musicians, thank you for all the work you've been doing, because I think that the fan-led review is going to make a lot of changes. It's already nudging the dial, and it's been brilliant to see the response. And thank you so much for your time. Drowning Sound listeners can also go and listen to your album, can't they? Do you want to tell people what it is and where they can find it?
That is very kind of you. It's called The Clown and the Cigarette Girl, and it is actually available on Spotify. It's also available on CD and vinyl.
Well, this podcast is in partnership. This podcast is in partnership with Qobuz, so we'll link to it in Qobuz in the links, and you'll get better royalties on that one.
Marvelous. I'll look forward to the sort of cascade of cash.
And what sort of music is it that you make so that people know what they're going to listen to?
Well, actually, I suppose that, but it's singer-songwriter. They're all songs that I've written, and it's a great album. I recommend it. I'm still recording. I'm recording it. I'm still doing some more recording at the moment, so that will be next year.
Is there many
probably.
other people in the House of Lords that have actually released records? I don't know if there is. You're in a small number.
I think there are one or two. There are one or two where there's an eminent peer who presents the program on Radio 3 as a composer and brilliant musician, Lord Berkeley, and there's another peer who goes under a name and releases things on Spotify. So there are a few.
You're not going to suddenly tell us that Aphex Twin is secretly in the House of Lords then?
No, but I can tell you that Aphex Twin's sister was a minister in the last Welsh Labour government. How's that for a bit of trivia?
That is the ending of this podcast. Thank you so much, Kevin.